David is coming up onto the stage. I'll just make a few comments about David. Professor David Abramson has been involved in computer architecture and high-performance computing research since 1979. Previous to joining Monash University in 1997, he's had a number of appointments, including at Griffith University, CSIRO and RMIT. David is currently an ARC Professorial Fellow, Professor of Computer Science in the Faculty of Information Technology at Monash University, and Science Director of the Monash eResearch Centre. David's current interests are in high-performance computer systems design and software engineering tools for programming parallel, distributed supercomputers, and stained glass windows. Something you might want to ask David about at the end of his presentation. How are you going, David? That's what David puts the finishing touches on his presentation. Right, David will be talking to us this morning on the topic of e-research. Are we making a difference yet? Or in fact, e-research, are we there yet? Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you, Wayne, for a great introduction too. I don't have a picture with Julie Gillard and John Brumfield and others. So I did change the title of this talk. Sometimes titles of talk work and sometimes you have to work on them, and this is one that I had to work on over a little while. I want to thank the organisers for inviting me to come and give this presentation. And what I'm going to talk about is a range of things we've been doing over quite some time. So the topic is, we've been doing research for a while now. For those of us who've been working on the research part of eResearch, how do we build the software systems and tools, we've been working on this for quite some time. And the obvious question people keep asking is, well, are you actually using it in practice, and are we there yet? So, given that Julia did read verbatim some of my web page on my interests, I love slipping that in, that you're interested in all sorts of geek topics plus other things. So here's some of my stained glass windows that I've made, but I won't talk about those unless there are questions on them. And before I get started, I also want to slip in an advertisement, and that is that next month we have the eScience conference in Brisbane. General Chair is Paul Rowe, somewhere in the audience. So registrations at the early bird rate are still open, and we're encouraging people to come along. So please look that up on the web and register. We've got a great range of papers and a great range of keynote speakers for that. Okay, but on with the talk. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about software tools. I'm going to talk about the e-laboratory and how that's evolving. And I'm going to talk about the research that we've been doing on that and how you build those software systems. So the first part, I normally give this talk actually sort of the other way around. I'll start out talking about the research and the technology and then finish up with some examples. Today I'm going to start out with the examples. I'm going to show you some of the things we've actually been deploying and doing, and that'll hopefully keep you awake for a little while. And then those who want to nod off, I can get into some of the more technical details. Julie, if you ask me what it is that keeps me awake at night, I can tell you every time I come to Queensland, even though I lived here for years, I forget that the sun gets up at 4 AM. So it was actually the sun that was keeping me up. So if you get a little bit dozy during the talk, I'll forgive you, and I've sort of swapped it around, so we'll do the interesting applications first. Many of you will know that we've been working for years on a software tool chain called Nimrod, and there are multiple different varieties of this. We slap a letter on the end of it, and I'll try and explain to you the differences between all of those. And this has allowed us to incrementally, in a sense, improve the infrastructure. are we there yet? Let's imagine we've got the donkey constantly asking us whether we've actually reached our goal. Machine thought it was doing. So I'm going to start out and go through a number of different case studies where we've applied the technology. So this is some work we did with Amanda Lynch and a group at Monash some years ago. Some of you might have seen this. And it's really characterising the type of science they wanted to do that was impossible. It's some of the things that Wayne was actually talking about where you just can't do the science. And so the question they had was actually relatively simple to phrase. It was, could burning the northern savannah of Australia have affected the climate? Right? In other words, if you have such massive destruction of the vegetation, can that actually have a flow-on effect to the climate? So if you had done your science 100 years ago, you might well have gone out there and burnt down the savannah to see whether in fact that had an effect on the weather, which of course is different from climate, and then maybe in some years you might measure whether that had any effect on climate. But of course, if you were a good scientist, you can't get away with doing that once. You've got to do it a couple of hundred times and then get some sort of statistical average and standard deviations and the like as to whether that was affecting the climate. So very clearly, this is the type of science that we want to do in silico. And so what they did was they took state-of-the-art climate models. They logically burnt the savannah, that is, you drop out the vegetation, and you burn it in many different ways. So you look at the onset of when you burn it. You look at intensity with which you burn it. You look at various parameters that control that you'd like to explore. And the picture on the right is actually the effect on the onset of the monsoon, actually in a couple of dimensions only, that we're showing that under certain circumstances, and not under all, in fact I haven't given you all the results there, but under certain circumstances, the destruction of the savannah at the right time, if you burn it just at the right time, you can actually affect the onset and the intensity of the monsoon. So this is the type of science that clearly we don't do. The graph at the bottom is actually a picture of machine cycles we use to do it, and you can't read the scales on that. But the thing that's interesting about that, that perhaps sets it aside from many other HPC applications, is that the scale on the bottom is 6 months. So this is a computation that actually ran over 6 months, and the vertical scale is the number of processors we're using, and so we ran a computational experiment that took 6 months and moved that work actually around the globe. You could argue we didn't actually have to do that, we could have just done it on one computer at that time, but what we were interested in doing was stretching the infrastructure to see, well, what happens? Can we move this style of computation around? When a single climate model of that scale takes 6 months to run, you don't let it run and not checkpoint it. And so we're checkpointing it regularly and then taking the data produced by that and moving it onto other machines. And I think we moved a couple of terabytes of data around the international networks. And that stretched all sorts of things. Like, for example, it stretched our its pricing policy. I actually got a bill for something like $8,000 for doing this, which I promptly sent back, by the way. So when you build the infrastructure out and try and do these large science experiments, you find out that some things don't work. For something completely different, this is some work we've been doing with a couple of groups internationally over the years. Those of you who heard Matthias Raymond yesterday from IBM, he gave quite a nice introduction to the whole idea of cardiac science. This is some work we've been doing both with groups in Oxford and groups at UCSD in California, where you're trying to simulate the basic function of the heart. And as a non-biologist, I'm constantly boggled by the complexity that's built into these systems that we're all using now as we just sit here as I talk and if you listen. The complexity in those systems that we don't understand most of is so dramatic that to be able to do anything in this area is quite remarkable. So we all know what a heart is. A heart is a device that pumps blood. It does that by a whole range of mechanisms across a multi-scale. So everything from individual iron flow in cardiac cells right through to the mechanical processes involved in the heart actually compressing and moving blood around. And the picture on the right, everyone of course recognises, I hope the picture on the left is some cartoon characterisation of a heart cut through. The picture on the right is a cartoon that you may not recognise, but it's a sort of cartoon that are drawn by people who work in this area. This is a cartoon understanding of a single ventricular myocyte, a single cardiac cell. And what they're drawing there is our understanding of the various physical structures and the ion channels that in fact cause that cell to contract. Okay, the cell contracts because ions are moving in and out of it, calcium ions are moving in and out of it, and this causes the cell to actually contract. And then the really remarkable part about it all is, of course, all of these cells actually contract together, and we get ejection of blood from the heart. So scientists are trying to understand the primitive function of those cells and what's going on. And there are all sorts of ions moving out, with sodium, with calcium, with magnesium, and there are little pumps that causes the cells to exchange, the ions to exchange across the cell wall. So we had a PhD student visit us from Oxford, and pretty much this 25-word summary of her PhD was, there's a thing called the sodium-calcium exchange pump, which is exchanging sodium and calcium across the cell wall. And the question really was, whereabouts in the cell is that? You've got this cell wall with a nice cartoon like that and various structures, and the PhD is, whereabouts do you think this is? Now this is a particularly nasty what's called an inverse problem, because you can't look at the cell and see that happening, so we don't actually know where it is. So if we have mathematical models that simulate the cell, and then we move those sodium-calcium exchange pumps around, and we get the cell to do the right thing, then maybe we've actually found the right location for those pumps. And so she came to us with this problem. We phrased this up, and I'm going to talk a lot more about workflows. We phrased this up as a scientific workflow, which is a graphical representation of the problem. You'll see that graph come back more and more. And we used the tools we had to change the parameters to the mathematical model automatically, so that we could then measure the difference between the graphs on the right of the action potential, or the way the cells actually, the ion flows are actually occurring in the cell, to minimise the difference between what a real cell does and what a simulated cell does. So we move this thing around automatically under the tool chain, and it comes up with parameters that say, well, these particular positions for the exchange pump are the ones that match reality. You still don't know whether that's actually where they are, but it's a damn good start. And so this is the beginning of multidisciplinary science. It's not just multi-scale, but we've got scientists from other disciplines coming together and working. And again, this is a very nice characterisation of the things Wayne was talking about, where we're pulling together multiple skills. Here's another example that we've been working with Leica Microsystems in Germany, and the picture on the video on the right is designed to keep you awake whilst I talk. It's actually a video of a demonstration we did to our collaborators in Leica in Germany of what we were doing. So microscopes on the left, they're typically standalone instruments. If you went to Leica and bought a microscope, they'd sell you this thing for a certain amount of money, and if you were lucky, and you are lucky, it has a network interface on it, you can take the data off it. These devices are all digital now. Moreover, they're not just generating images for the sake of generating images, they're generating images that need to be enhanced, they're generating images that need to be stored, archived, and they're generating images that need to be interpreted by humans and visualized. So the ecosystem in which a microscope now lives is no longer just the microscope in the lab, it's the microscope in the world. And so again, what we've been doing is using scientific workflows to orchestrate the experiment. So when a scientist walks in and says, the experiment I want to do today is this, they actually create a scientific workflow that says, I'll take the data from the instrument, push it through this processing, and by the way, I'll tell you something about where that processing is going later. I want to put it on this archive, and I'll tell you something about where that archive is later, and I want to put it on this scientific visualization device so that I can look at it. The picture at the bottom is Martin Lackman, my collaborator from Monash, who's actually looking at a cancer cell in significant glorious detail. And the video on the top was showing you various aspects of us demonstrating that infrastructure, running microscopes in Australia and microscopes in Germany, controlled by a workflow running in Australia, sending the data to machines to be processed somewhere else, and then pulling all that back together. And so this is ongoing work. So there's the workflow on the bottom. And what happens as a result of this workflow executing is that automatically you get the raw image from the microscope. You get an enhanced version of that as it's gone through various filtering steps. You get an even further enhanced step of that as you do automatic segmentation and boundary calculations. And then you do various automatic computations that say things like the number of cells you're seeing of this type. So that now when a scientist publishes a paper on why their cancer therapy works, they can actually publish the graphs that say it not only works, but here's some numerical, some quantitative information about what happens to the vasculature around the cancer, how many blood vessels are actually denatured and destroyed, how many of these things are actually working. So we're getting quantitative data robustly. I can run that experiment again and I'll get the same answers. So let me finish with one last example, and that is, and it's got a nice bit of sociological science story to it as well. What we're finding is that the same infrastructure is working for different problems. So the problem I told you about before in cardiac science is done jointly with the cardiac mechanics group at the integrated biology group at Oxford. And we've been working on that for a number of years. And then Dave Gavigan, who's the lead of that group, said one of his collaborators in chemistry, I think some of these software tools will actually work for some of the problems we're trying to solve in chemistry. So that's pretty exciting. We're going from cardiac science across to chemistry, and the same software tools are actually applying. I actually get quite excited about this example because the real twist in it is that his collaborator is actually Professor Alan Bond, who's a professor of chemistry at Monash University in Australia. So we've exported the technology to Oxford. It's been used in cardiac science there, transferred across to chemistry, and comes back to the group at Monash. And we're now working quite closely with this group at Monash. So perhaps there's a message in all of that for international engagement. And what they do is they take chemical reactions and they measure the things that they can measure. And there's all sorts of other things that they can't measure that they really want to know. So the electrochemistry group have this device on the left, which is actually fairly simple. You put the chemicals in a test tube, you put a couple of electrodes in it, and you measure, you put a voltage across it or a current through it, and you measure the other. And you can measure the resistance of that fairly easily, but you can't necessarily measure the rate constant of the chemistry that's going on. And so behind that is a whole stack of theoretical models about these other constants. And guess what? That looks awfully like a mathematical model of a cardiac cell, where you've got a mathematical model and you're trying to fit the parameters to that based on what the real experiment's telling you. In this one, we measure the currents through there, we do Fourier analysis on those, and we try and fit constants to the mathematical model that gives us the constants we actually want. And so the workflow on the top right there is starting to look a little bit more complex than the other one. It does a few different operations. If you've been watching the movie on the bottom there, it's actually been changing. You might not have noticed that, but that's actually, it's a bit hard to see in there, but it's actually an automatic search that's going on by the tools to try and find the regions of space that work. So all of these applications, they're quite varied, sit on top of a common tool chain. So what I want to do now is, so for those of you who are just interested in the applications, you can nod off, but what I want to do now is try and tell you something about the technologies under that. And this is a little bit of a journey as well, because this has been going on for a good part of my research career. So I'm going to start out with some of the tools that many of you will have heard about that we've been using all along, and then you'll see how these have evolved into new tools. So we've been doing what we call robust science. It's robust science because I'm able to look at more combinations than I would previously do with this tool family called Nimrod. And there are different varieties of that. There's one called Nimrod G, there's one called Nimrod O, there's one called Nimrod E, there's one called Nimrod K. There are various two-letter combinations of those, so you can see that this should be able to keep me in research projects until I run out of funding or disappear off the end. Nimrod G allows you to explore what happens to a system when you change all of the parameters. So I have parameters of the system, I discretize them, and I say, what happens when I take the cross product of all of those and I generate lots and lots of runs? And that's the most primitive form in which you use this tool. Nimrod O does optimization. So if you listen to the examples I gave you before, some of those are phrased as optimization problems. That is, here's an action potential distribution for a real cardiac cell. Here's one for a distributed, for a simulated cell. I want you to compute the difference between those and then automatically minimize that difference. And that's an optimization problem. So the version of Nimrod that does optimization has nonlinear optimization algorithms built into it, and it automatically tweaks the parameters. runs the system, it walks through space and comes back. There's another variety here called Nimrod E that does the design of experiments, and for some of you may have heard of this. It's a robust and automatic way of trimming down the amount of work you would otherwise do. Nimrod G is quite capable of generating more runs than we have electrons in the universe, but people forget that there's a combinatorial explosion. If I've got 100 parameters and only a couple of values each, that's a lot of runs. And so design of experiments goes back to the 1930s, in which there are fairly well-defined statistical techniques for cutting down how many runs you do and still getting some quality of science out of that. So we built that in there. We have a couple of different techniques. And then finally, the version which is like, it's the most recent amount of research we've been doing is how do you take all of that into this scientific workflow environment? That's called Nimrod K for a reason to see in a moment. So traditionally, users have used our tools by describing the problem. In this case, it's using a fairly simple declarative file. They submit it to a system that's actually portal-based, so it can be accessed from a variety of different places. We actually have Nimrod portals in Oxford, in California, at Monash, and these access a range of computational and other devices internationally, but they present a view to the user, which is a single point of presence. These runs through one of those mechanisms I just talked about generate jobs that are sent to machines. That could be just the one machine here in my lab, or it could be a range of machines, and you don't want to get too caught up in exactly where those computers are. These runs are done, the results come back and are often scientifically visualized. So users interact with the portal, you don't have to read the print on that, it's exactly as you might expect a portal to look like. And as I said, the machines themselves could be globally distributed. So we've done everything from drug docking, plus the little examples I showed you before, drug docking, antenna design, aerofoil design, a whole raft of different applications using the same infrastructure. And most recently, we've added functionality to this fairly seamlessly. I mean, there's been so much hype about cloud computing. But guess what? Cloud just sort of most naturally integrates into this overall environment, because if I don't care where the compute resources are, then the cloud's actually an ideal device for that. And the work we've done on trying to schedule these, the research we've done on scheduling these, just fits in there very naturally. And so there are two, a little bit hard to read, but there are two curves on that graph there that show two different compute resources, one of which is our own cluster, the other which is an Amazon EC2 cloud. And our scheduling heuristics know that we're paying for the cloud and we're not paying for the local compute, so it tries to do as much of the compute as it can on our local cluster, and at some point it says, you know, you're not going to meet the deadline of getting the paper you want written by tomorrow if I don't use some extra resources, so give me your credit card, stick it in the EC2, and I'll start to send some compute jobs off of the EC2. At some point it realizes that you can actually stop doing them there and finish them locally, and so it automatically schedules across that infrastructure. So that's pretty nice of it. So that's sort of like historically, that's where we've been. Where are we now and where are we going? And the answer to this comes in the form of scientific workflows. Now I know some of you have heard talks on scientific workflows. I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about how that enables the sort of science that I've been talking about today. I'm going to talk about a workflow engine called Kepler. Now there are tens or hundreds of workflow engines. For some reason, every computer science group in the world seems to think that it has to go and build its own, and so we've got no shortage of different choices. That's the old joke about standards. The great thing is there's so many of them to choose from. We chose to work with Kepler for a whole raft of both pragmatic and scientific reasons. I hope you'll see some of those go through. It's a multi-site, open source, collaborative tool developed predominantly at the University of California in San Diego and in Davis, but there's a large number of groups that contribute to that. There are components that come from Berkeley over a long track record, a long historical record of research. So it's a nice engine in which to do the research and plug our components in. And one of the reasons that we have chosen it is that we can in fact plug our bits in there and not lose the whole thing. So I just want to introduce a couple of different concepts that are really true across most workflow engines, but there are differences. So Kepler talks about actors and it talks about directors. And the actors are the things that do the work. So if I'm a scientist, or by the way, I use this term scientist very, very broadly. It could be social science, it could be humanities. If there's some functions that I want to execute on some data, or there are some functions that I want to execute on an instrument, or some other device, then I use an actor. And an actor is a piece of code or a component in software engineering terms that does some work for me, and then I connect these components together. And so I take actors and I put links between them, and the links say things like data is going to come from this actor and go to that actor. And you can think about that as data is going to come from this microscope and go to this computer to process it, or data is going to come from this climate model and go to this other processing model somewhere else, and the data will move between them. And so Kepler is built on top of this idea of an actor. It's built on top of an engine called Ptolemy that comes from Berkeley and has been an active research project for many, many years. So we've got this formal model of computation. There are formal semantics defined for how actors interact. And there are actors for all sorts of things. So there are computations that invoke MATLAB code. There are actors that invoke web services. There are actors that look up databases using standard commercial database technology. There are actors that talk to storage resource brokers. There are actors that talk to imaging devices. And so the beauty of this is that as the community grows, the actor library grows. And so I get a bigger and bigger range of things that I can actually invoke. And in a sense, part of our research has been adding to that actor library as I'm going to see. There are things called directors that control the actors. And the directors are the things that orchestrate the workflow. So when I put a graph up there like the ones you've seen today, and I draw these actors, the question is, how does that actually execute? And so the directors control, this actor computes this now and sends the data using this to this actor. And again, because this is a long-running research project, Ed Lee's group has done a great job of exploring a whole stack of different execution semantics. So when I draw a graph like that, you might automatically think data flow, but actually there's time trigger, there's synchronous event, there's other process networks, there's all sorts of other formal computer science models of how those actors can interact. And I can change them by just taking off one director and putting another director back in. It really is quite easy. And then where this all comes together and gets nice little pictures that I can put on slides is through a thing called Virtual, which is the user interface. And you don't have to have a user interface that's graphical. But most people like the idea of dragging and dropping actors onto a canvas and connecting them up with wires. And because it very clearly shows the underlying science that's been executed. So you can drag and drop them, you can search for them, you can look for actors in the actor library. For those of us who used to work in computer design, that's no different from going and getting the manual of all of the chips that are manufactured and saying, I want a chip that does this. And I drag and drop that onto the canvas. So Kepler is a very solid engine on which I can build the work I'm trying to do. And so the obvious question is, why have you got ARC grants working on this if it's all there? And the answer is, of course, it's not all there. You could say, look, you just told me there were 50 other workflow engines, haven't they all got it? And the answer is that some groups are focused on one bit and not another, and another workflow engine does some of these things, but doesn't do some of the things over there. So what we've been doing is computer science research on how we augment, or how we come up with various execution mechanisms, and we've been testing those inside Kepler. So what doesn't Kepler do? It doesn't do what I call transparent remote invocation. That means I want to run a computation, and I don't want to talk about how to run it, I don't want to talk about where to run it, I don't want to go through all the gumph. If any of you have developed a Kepler workflow prior to this, you'll know that you have to do a lot of work to specify how to run this computation on the national compute infrastructure, and it's in Canberra, and my code is here and all of this stuff. And I don't want to do that as a scientist, I want to do science. It doesn't do what I call transparent and flexible data transport. It does data transport, but you have to do things like saying, here's an actor that copies this file from this machine in Canberra and sends it to this machine in Melbourne. Well, that's not terribly transportable when I go and take that to Oxford and find out that those machines aren't actually there. It's also a whole raft of stuff that I don't want to talk about. It actually doesn't do parallel execution terribly well. If I want to run a climate model 100 times looking at 100 different use cases of burning the savannah, then I'd like the workflow designer to just say, run a model, and here are the parameters. And I want the system to worry about how many times that actually gets replicated. It doesn't do robust design of the type I've been talking about. That is, I want to explore these parameters. I have to set all of that up. And it doesn't do scientific visualization. So you say, well, what use is that? It doesn't do any of these things. But the answer is it's a framework in which I can plug the things I want to do. And I plug them in by doing two things. I plug them in by writing new actors, and they get into the actor library. And I plug them in by writing a new director, as it turns out, which changes the orchestration semantics of the workflow. So let me walk you through some of the things we've done. I'll try and move through this fairly quickly, and you'll get a flavour for how we've added those in. So Nimrod K is a thing that takes all of the Nimrod ideas that we had in the earlier Nimrod tools and integrates them into Catplots. That's where the K comes from. So it does massively parallel execution. It does transparent data transport. It does robust design of the type of Nimrod G, O, and E. And we've built some multimodal-based visualization actors in that way to produce workflows that take data from a microscope and put it on a multimodal, for example. So how do we do parallelism in workflows? Well, actually, this is a wonderful example of where it's actually good to be one of the older guys, because I can remember how we were trying to do parallel computing in the 1980s, and my young grad students weren't there, and they don't think anyone ever did that. So it turns out back then there was this model of computation called data flow, and we were trying to build machines that executed multiple things at once. But people wanted to write simple graphs. They want to say, do this, do that, do that. And it turns out there's a whole body of literature on how to do parallel computing across that. And it's called data flow computing, and lots of people did lots of work on it. And the one that we've chosen is something called dynamic data flow that allows you to thread the workflow. That is, think of multiple threads of computation going through what is conceptually a very simple workflow. From the scientist's point of view, they write down some simple science. And from the machine's point of view, it sees tokens flying between these various different actors and lots of different tokens. And I won't go into all the details about that, but these tokens, which are the bits of data flowing between them, are coloured or tagged. And the colour that they hold tells the system which thread they're in. And we can stream them through the workflow independently. So if I have 1,000 different scenarios of what it's like to burn the savannah, I generate 1,000 different tokens and I throw them down the same workflow, and the system keeps them all separate. And the system worries about replication and parallelism. The system worries about stacking them up. So actually in that little picture there I showed you actors sort of moving backwards down the screen. Well, think of those as parallel versions of the same thing. But the designer doesn't see that complexity. So we did this by taking, believe it or not, Ptolemy didn't have a director that did this. So what we've had, I've actually had a PhD student working on it for some time now, is how do you design a director that does all of this parallel execution with dynamically coloured tokens moving around this engine that's been designed over the last 10 years? Well, it turns out you can do it by writing a new director, and Kepler knows about people writing directors. So it does threading, it keeps multiple copies or clones of the actors, it keeps tags on the tokens so that they're distinguished in time and space, and it schedules them. And it's all done by this little picture at the bottom. It's the Nimrod director. Looks like all the other directors, except it does this different orchestration. And so this is the model we're taking. It comes from Manchester University, as I said, and MIT, where they were trying to independently build these machines. And at the top is what we think of as simple data flow. That is, I've got an actor, I throw into it some data, I throw in some data on the other arc, when both bits of data are there, you do the function and you emit an answer. That's what moves the little black along the right there. And the bottom line is exactly the same thing from the user's design point of view, the same, except that these are coloured and they're all moving through in parallel. And the system worries about how many copies of that actor they keep running. Skip the little visualization there. So logically, the user writes a workflow that looks like that, and the system at runtime dynamically generates that. All right, and so there are multiple copies running points. So here's an example from the cardiac simulation area where you want to do a parameter sweep. So you say, here's a parameter sweep actor, and I want to generate a whole stack of scenarios and send that into a MATLAB model of a rabbit heart. So there's a MATLAB actor which comes with standard Ptolemy. And then I want to do a little bit more processing on that, and I want to produce a graph. Simple enough science, right? But it turns out that we're running multiple copies in parallel. The graph at the bottom is showing up to 500 instances of that MATLAB computation running concurrently. The graph at the top shows you the science outcomes. That is, for some of these parameter values, the output there doesn't vary, and some of it does. And that's all done in this engine using some of the techniques I just talked about. It turns out that optimization is a really good match for a workflow. So a workflow says, do this, do that, do this, do this. And people think of that as an acyclic graph. That is, you start at one end and finish at the other. There are no cycles. Well, optimization adds cycles into that. Because what optimization says is, do this, do that, measure the difference, try and minimize it, and go back around. That's what we do when we're manually optimizing some system. We're iterating, we're tweaking. So to introduce optimization into a workflow is logically fairly simple. Well, it's not so simple actually, but it looks simple on the workflow. So again, I've got some actors on the right-hand side that say things like define the search space, select the search space parameters, and then do a thing called simplex optimization. Now that, if you're a mathematician, you'll know that that's a very old and very well-defined search algorithm. What you do with the output of that is you send it into this MATLAB model of a cardiac cell or something. Right? So we invoke some MATLAB. The little RMS box on the bottom right there is one that we've written to just compute the root mean square difference between the two different graphs. Fairly simple statistical technique for working out whether they're the same. We take the output of that. That is now an objective cost function measure of how different they are, but it's a number. And I feed it back into the simplex. And the simplex says, that's not a very good answer, let's try moving the parameters and go over here. So we iterate around this cycle. Now what we've got is a combination of nonlinear optimization algorithms, some computational science, and a programming methodology or programming framework in which you can hook them together. And so I can start to mix and match optimization algorithms. I can say, well, you know what, I want to do simplex for a while, but then I'd like to use a genetic algorithm. Or I want to use a genetic algorithm and it's the same basic science. And so I can start to mix and match things, and I'll show you an example at the moment. So coming back to the cardiac science example, this is a real one we did with our collaborators at UCSD, where some students actually came across and they were given the problem of trying to optimize the 9 parameter space of a model. Now 9 parameters, starts to generate quite a lot of runs. We did this as an optimization problem, and it turns out that groups of parameters are actually independent. We didn't know this up front, but it turns out having done the science, they're independent. And so there are other ways of specifying an optimization problem. And another way of specifying it is to say, look, there are actually 4 search spaces. Same science, I want you to do a simplex optimization, and now I'm sending into that 4 different searches. Now you're not having to keep them apart because the colouring or the token tagging keeps them apart for you. So you've got multiple experiments now running through the same thing. So the same workflow on the sort of like the bottom right of that graph, and the only difference is the way we're generating those searches. And I've got various graphs showing these things running on different machines. That's not what's interesting. I think what I want to focus on here is that here we've got 2 different ways of doing the search. I could do a 9 parameter space search on the top and just throw them in and let the system find them. Or because I know something about the system, I can tailor it. And I can actually do a much more efficient search. So the same modelling effort with different searches, and on the right-hand side is actually a graph of those 2 experiments running side by side, and the one that finishes first is the one that's only doing 4 lots of much smaller searches. So we'd actually get solutions that are as good as the one that ran on. So we can let the system keep optimizing using hundreds of CPUs and it'll keep going for a while, or I can have a simple search. So the moral of this isn't whether one search is better than the other. The moral here is that I can move from one experiment to another experiment by reconfiguring the workflow. That's the take-home message from that. I told you before about Nimrod E. Nimrod E does partial search. You couldn't believe how many times we have someone come in and say, oh, I've got 100 parameters and they take on 10 values each, and let's do a simulation. just basic combinatorics and say, you're never going to finish this. So, as I said, going back to the 30s, there are some very well-defined techniques. Fractional factorial design is one of them. Latin hypercubes, you may have heard of these various different techniques for reducing the amount of work we do. They're all based on the premise that you can't look at all the combinations. So how can I prune that search space without favouring the search that I'm sort of looking in one part? Fractional factorial design limits the number of combinations of different parameters that you look at. And the underlying idea is that the higher order combinations probably don't affect the result. So you don't have to look at all combinations. If you can look at lower order combinations, you may get enough of a sampling of that to do robust science. And so there's this model that, again, fits really nicely into a workflow where you're saying generate some parameter combinations and then do some evaluation. So we have actors that look at generating a fractional factorial design and actors that look at the effects of those. So here's the same workflow that you've seen a few times now with some MATLAB computation in it. And the difference now is that we've got an experimental design system on the left generating designs sent into the computation, and the output of that is analysed. And there are a few different statistical techniques for analysing these, and I won't go into the details, but what they allow you to do is very quickly, visually see which combinations are important and which are not. There are two sorts of plots that are generated. There are length plots and Daniel plots, and these are shown on the right-hand side. And in the top plot, it's just the effect of a particular parameter is measured vertically. And so what you're seeing as data points there are different parameters and different combinations and the effect they have on the output. So on the left, and they're sorted. So on the left-hand side, the parameters that are having the most of the effect are the ones that are a long way away from the axis. And then as you go on, they disappear into this having little effect. And that's actually supporting this underlying hypothesis that higher order combinations don't affect the output very much. And so you can truncate the run and not look at all of the higher order combinations. The picture at the bottom is just a different version of that, which again, things that lie on the line, I think are the ones that don't have much effect on the outliers, the ones that do, which are around like those. So we get some fairly simple graphical techniques for that, and these are things that can be built into actors. So we've built actors that do these things. And so if you look at what happens inside any particular actor, here's the experimental design one, and there's some text in there. That is the same declarative description I put into the older Nimrod tools, something saying here are the parameters, but now I'm actually putting them into the actor as configuration information for the actor. So again, this is another example from a group that came from UCSD. By the way, we have a wonderful scheme where they send us about half a dozen students each year who don't know what research is. They're undergraduate students. A lot of them are often bioengineering students, and they get dropped in a computer science lab and they spend the next 9 weeks there learning some computing. And they just do the most amazing things. I like to think it's because no one ever actually told them it was impossible. So they come in, they do their work, and they leave. So these examples, many of these examples I'm giving you have come from undergraduate students who didn't know what any of our tools were. They knew something about the modelling they were doing, and over a 9-week period, they did some really amazing science. But that's an aside. So here's an example where they've come in, and the question was, again, think back to that cartoon I gave you of a cardiac cell with all of its complexity. The question is, the statement is we can't afford to simulate all of the possible configuration parameters of ion, cell, ion, flows and the like. So which ones are important? We actually know that there are various mechanisms that are not important for all the things the cell does. We know that in drug therapy, some drugs affect things more than others. And so the question that this student was working on was, how can I look at some of the effects of just some of those parameters and not do the whole simulation? So again, it was a MATLAB model of a rabbit heart. And what the student comes out with is various graphs for these Daniel and length plots that I showed you before. And lo and behold, a whole stack of parameters don't have much effect, and the combinations of those parameters don't have much effect. And this was a very nice example of where the student came in, did the work, said, yes, You know, it's this particular L-type channel that seems to be effective, and this particular ion flow over here, and just taken that back to the scientists, and now they're sort of scratching their head trying to work out, well, is the model wrong, or is there actually something fundamentally true about the science that they've just done? So it's spawned a whole further wave, if you like, of research. So lots of the parameters don't affect the output there. Again, in the right-hand plot, you can see a whole stack cluster around, the combinations cluster around this line. They don't get to the outliers that actually are the ones that are of interest. So then what you do is a different kind of physical experiment. You go and you look at that and you say, okay, let's now have a much closer look at these things to see whether they're effective. So let me finally talk about some things we've added in here to do scientific visualization. The picture on the bottom was the one I showed you before of Martin Lackman talking about a talking about a cancer cell. The amount of biology I've learned in the last 10 years is horrible. I only seem to learn about nasty things like cardiac failure and cancer and all sorts of other medicines, but I guess they're the interesting ones. And so what he's looking at here is a cancer cell that's in fact been, you can't see it very well on the screen, it's been coloured up using fluorescence microscopy so that the cancer cells that are actually tagged with a particular colour, and the vasculature of the blood vessels around the cancer are tagged with another colour. And in fact, they have an anti-cancer therapy, which is in Thursday trial at the moment, which works by destroying the blood vessels. So it starts the cancer by actually breaking down the vasculature. The things they do to mice, you don't want to know about. So this is a mouse tumour in glorious detail. He's actually able to stand up there in front of an optical, which is a high-resolution multi-tile display wall, and talk about it. Now the question is, if you've just done a workflow that does those computations for you, the ones I showed you earlier, and produces the graphs and yada yada yada, and then you want to get that onto the tile display wall, well, at the moment you have to physically copy them from one computer to another computer, which is just really the opposite of everything we've been trying to do. So we built an experimental version of some optiportal actors that just fit into the workflow. So the little one I've circled there says, do the computation, do all of the science, and then the output just gets streamed to an optiportal. And for those of you who can remember Minority Report, you know, we haven't quite got there, but my vision is that Martin would actually, you know, wave his arms around this, and that would interact, in fact, with the workflow and come back into the workflow. And so we're actually not too far off that. And so we've been doing some work with the optiportal middleware stack, Sage, that comes from the US, Chicago, and Chicago DBL Visualization Lab, and built some stuff into that that integrates it with the Kepler workflows. So finally, I want to talk a little bit about I guess a little bit of the softer machinery to do with how you make all of this work. So workflows turn out to be a whole stack of things. They turn out to be a formal description of what I'm trying to do. They turn out to be an executable description of what I'm trying to do, so it's robust and routine, I can do it again. And they turn out to be a whole stack of documentation. How many of us document our code, let alone document our science? Well, it turns out scientists are very good at documenting their science. They do it in things like this. This is Mary Vale's lab notebook on her microscopy work. And you can see that she writes things in there. Writes a whole stack of things in there about what she's doing. She'll cut out the visualizations of the various slides and paste them in. She says the data, by the way, where are the ANS people? The data is stored on disks number 118, see that on the bottom left, top right, the top left corner there, right? This is where the data is. That actually is state of the art in archiving data, and it doesn't say it, but they're probably in the top drawer there. And I'm glad to say Monash has now moved across to a large data store in which that's gone, right? It's still off in a file system that's maintained and the like. But there's a lot of stuff stored in this lab notebook. On the right-hand side, there's the chemical formula for getting this experiment to happen. So at Monash, we're actually exploring electronic lab notebooks, and there's a relationship between those and workflows. Because what's not written on this lab notebook is what did she do with the images? Well, the way she used to do it is she'd take them off the microscope from one system, put them on another system, and then process them using a particular software package, and then take them off that, and that's all lost. the workflow actually captures that information. You took it from this microscope, you ran MATLAB on it, then you ran ImageJ on it, and then you put it on an optical and stored it in this position in our large data store. And it's all documented. And so we've been doing some work in using a thing called My Experiment, which comes from the UK, from David Abramson and Carol Goebel, which was originally designed to store Taverno workflows, which is another workflow engine. We've set up a site called myexperiment.org.au. And what this allows us to, what this provides is a repository where I can put my workflows. And we did this as a little bit of experiment, and it's actually really interesting how quickly the lab community has picked up on this. And so what you can do is you can develop the workflows, you can share them across your lab, they're stored there, and people can retrieve them. Now workflows capture the science, the way of doing science in that lab. What I often do is take data off this particular microscope and do this particular processing, and a new grad student comes into my lab. Instead of having to tell them that, I say, go to the My Experiment repository. You will find a workflow that does this. It's documented. You can actually search for it, and you can pull it down and execute it yourself. You can modify it, and you can upload it again. And so we actually get provenance information that's tracking these workflows as they evolve. So it's a nice example where an eResearch tool designed for one domain has actually, we've managed to pick it up and use it in this. And so Dave likes this because you know, it's a good example of cross, well, international and interdisciplinary science. So let me finish up with the ultimate yes minister type answer. That is, are we there yet? And the answer is, of course, yes and no. But I hope what I've done is shown you that some of the yeses are really worth sticking with. That is, there's no question that we're doing new science that wasn't done before. And that's not just we're using some high-performance computers. It's new science that pulls together the computation, the data archives, the repositories, the visualization devices, the instruments, all of the networks, all of the things that we talk about at eResearch. We're actually able to do new science with those. That's very exciting. We are deploying some of these systems. And we're using some shared repositories, and I think that's a very small data point that says that the scientists actually get that. They understand that if they can store their workflow in a repository, someone else can use it. Now, I think that's got a little bit oversold. It's unlikely that someone will pick up that workflow on the other side of the world because there's a whole stack of domain information which is very, very low level. But if I can even use that within one lab at Monash, that's valuable. The students come and go. The way you do science in my lab can be preserved in those workflows. So the answer is no, of course, as well, that we haven't quite finished. It still requires too much effort for non-specialists. Now I say that, I just gave you a whole pitch about how easy it is, but I've got a bunch of guys who help people do this. And the Monash eResearch Centre has a bunch of guys that help people do it, and we're not over that yet. So we still have to hold hands in this. The infrastructure itself is still fragile. We work on research prototypes. I'm not a production engineering lab. I'm not funded to do production engineering. And so the infrastructure we produce sometimes breaks. Sometimes, not often. We don't have a lot of examples of moving research from research into production. I mean, you can probably name them on a couple of hands worth of fingers of the research projects, things like Condor, for example, Taverno and the like. These are wonderful case studies, but they're probably the exception rather than the rule, where we've taken some research that's been done in the computer science lab and moved it into production. And I think we need to get better at that, and there are various groups around the world that try and do that differently. And here's my last, soapbox plug that please take back to Canberra, because it's one I want to work on over the next few years, and that is that our granting bodies don't understand the multidisciplinarity of modern science. I think the structures that we've got in our research funding bodies go back not to the last century, of course, because most of us are still there, but the century before that. We have panels that are vertical silos, and I've served in the ARC. I know what happens when you put a multidisciplinary project in there. It might fall down through the cracks, or it might bounce around the corridors the Ridges Hotel in Canberra, but it doesn't get supported in the way it needs to. I hope in the case studies I pulled out for you at the beginning, I've convinced you that it's the multidisciplinarity that's the really exciting part. That's where the innovation is going to occur. So I might wander around talking about all this stuff. There's a bunch of people who actually do the work, so I want to acknowledge their contribution. There's a bunch of people who give us money. That's even more important, perhaps. And if we have time, I'm happy to take questions. And please don't forget to register for eScience in Brisbane next month. Thank you. And I'll take questions on lead lights as well if you want.
Just a couple of comments before we move into the questions. I found that an absolutely fascinating presentation, which really made very real, I think, the new ways of thinking and doing and the almost limitless possibilities that they provide if we can get them right and get support for those approaches is working. I really appreciated your candour in terms of your answer to are we there yet? And of course, coming from Canberra and coming from government, one of the things I'm really interested in is the implications of all of this and how the policy and how we support this as we go forward. So that was terrific. I'm sure there must be questions following that presentation. So would you put your hand up if you'd like to ask them? And I invite you to say who you are and where you're from before you ask the question.
Hi, this is Bill Appleby from BPAC. I've got a question about what you said in the end, which is difficulty required for non-specialists to use this. For specialists, these tools get more and more complicated. So MRK is far more complicated than what we before. So there's a real danger in getting it for non-specialists that either they'll find it difficult to use, confusing, or even generate research outcomes which are incorrect. So is the solution to make the tools easier? Is the solution to train up the non-specialists, or is the solution to partner, specialists with people that know how to use the tools? So, also,
that wasn't the Dorothy Dixon bill, was it? The answer is, of course, all three. I think that there's too many classic computer scientists who think that all they have to do is make the tool better or the science better, and we want to work out how to use it, and that's not true. But we clearly have to do a better job there. But the partnering thing is critical. And again, this is something that's hard to wire into an ARC grant. That if you're doing fundamental research in the computer science end of it, but you want to demonstrate that the tools are useful, then you need people who actually do that. So we've always held hands much longer than some other groups. And I'm very fortunate at Monash that we have an eResearch centre that understands that hand-holding has to extend beyond that. So I'm corrupting them, I suppose, in some sense by doing that. But I think the answer is.
Hi, I'm Paddy from Griffith University. Do you find it easy to distribute your directors and actors into Kepler from my experiment, or are you also distributing a customized version of Kepler so that people are starting off with the basis for one that has the directors and actors inside it?
The high-level answer to that is that it's actually easy to distribute them as part of Kepler. The technicalities, which might be what you're getting at, is that it is still difficult to distribute some of these actors and directors with Kepler. Kepler is an ongoing, evolving project, and one of the issues they're actually trying to tackle is how do you make it easier to distribute that part. So I think the short answer is that it should be easier than it is. But I think we're all heading in the right direction, and we work very closely with the groups in the US that are trying to do that. But there's some mechanics with how you distribute it that do make it a bit messy.
To run a workflow on clouds. Example might be software foundation.
some merit in considering how those tools might be used or your tools might be used.
So, okay, thanks, Nick. So I hope what I didn't do was, I hope this wasn't such a market pitch that he's going to come out of things saying, David's saying the only tools that work is Kepler and yada yada. So I really do want to stress there's a whole ecosystem out there. It's the fundamental ideas there that I'm trying to get across. And of course the answer is that there are other workflow engines out there. The integration with the cloud is something that's simplifying in one sense. And so if there are commercial offerings out there that really do it, then I think we should adopt those. The only attribute of this particular environment I'd say was good is the ability to add things in. So it's that pluggability that the engine will never have all of what you want. But please don't take this as marketing. I've got no shares in Kepler.
Yeah, so Richard set up from the University of Melbourne. I've been involved in lots of research projects, and I was in the workflow space, but most of the real challenges that are facing the community are to do with data and security. It's not just about simulations. How do you couple that with your workflow and computer-oriented?
So again, if you come out of this with the idea that it's only about compute, then I've not done a very good job of selling what we're doing. Now, it's absolutely true that our historical path has been focused on compute, but workflows are about the integration of data and computation. Another one of my soapboxes is I don't like the way we break the research landscape up into compute and data. If you have terabytes of data, what do you want to do with it? It was either generated by a computation or you want to compute over it. And so this split in the infrastructure just doesn't make any sense. So certainly you will have heard Carol talk more often than not about the use of development workflows in there, and a lot of that is about data. So we're using a generic workflow engine so that we can integrate those. Some of the workflows I showed you had actors on there that put things in an Amero repository on a large data set. So what I'm trying to do here is add in the robustness that you need to do the science. And it may not be working on a computational model. It could be doing some parameter optimization on a real data set that happens to be terabytes big. Okay.
We have time for this morning, so I'm getting a strong sense that we could have gone on talking about this for quite some time. We're not able to do that. But can I just thank you once again for a really fascinating presentation, and it's a pleasure to present